Is the mic on? Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Bruegel. So my name is Gregory Kless. I'm a research fellow here at Bruegel. I'll be moderating the debate today on universal basic income. Let me first thank the audience for coming in such big numbers, but also our speakers for accepting my invitation to come today to have this debate on universal basic income. So this idea of universal basic income, which is basically an unconditional money transfer paid to every individual in a geographical entity, has been floated around for a few decades, or in fact, according to your book, even for a few centuries. So for a long time, it was really discussed by the academia. It was a bit confined to the academia. It was discussed by economists, by sociologists, by political scientists. But it was not a mainstream debate. But however, in the last few years, this idea of universal basic income has gained a lot of traction and has now entered, in fact, in my view, a broader debate and a more mainstream political debate. We have seen, for example, in France, that it was one of the main proposals of one of the main candidates in the presidential elections that took place in May. In Switzerland, there was a referendum on universal basic income last year in 2016. And I think one of the main reasons behind the popularity of universal basic income is that maybe universal basic income answers some of the most fundamental questions of our time, namely, for instance, the rise of inequality, but also maybe the transformation of work, given that there is, some people claim that there is some uberisation of society, some transformation of work due to robotisation, some jobs will disappear. So this UBI might be an answer to all those fundamental questions. And as a result, UBI is now tested in many parts of the world, in Finland, but also in the Netherlands, in France, in Canada, in the UK, in Italy. There are small experiments everywhere. So in order to discuss the benefits and the potential drawbacks, but also maybe the practical implication also of implementing the universal basic income at the scale of a country or even at a continent, if we talk about a European universal basic income. We will have today three excellent speakers with us, three experts of the topic. That have been working on this for a bit of time. So we will start first with Professor Olli Kagas, who is the professor at Helsinki University and head of the research department of the Finnish Social Insurance Institution, and who is in charge of the Finnish experiment today. Then we'll have also Philippe van Parijs, who is professor at the University of Louvain, and he has been a strong advocate of universal basic income for years. He's one of the founders of the Basic Income Earth network. And he's more recently the author of a book on universal basic income, which is called Basic Income, a Radical Proposal for a Free Society and a Sane Economy, that is published with Yannick van der Vogt at Harvard University Press. And finally, we have Professor Ilmar Schneider, who is the CEO of ISA, the Institute for Labor Economics, and is the author of a critical paper on universal basic income that was published recently, called Universal Basic Income, Empty Dreams of Paradise, where he criticized not only the concept itself, but also the way experiments are taking place. So I hope we'll have a good debate, given that we have different views. So how are we going to proceed? I suggest that we start with Olli first, who will present us, in fact, what's taking place at the moment in Finland and the experiment that he has been conducting there. Then we'll do it in alphabetical order. We'll have Ilmar who will give us his main arguments, I suppose, against universal basic income. And we'll finish with Philippe, who will discuss the main benefits of universal basic income. And then we'll have then a Q&A with the audience. So please.
You should mention that Anke couldn't.
Yeah. In fact, we had a fourth speaker that was on the program. but unfortunately, she could not make it for personal reasons. So we're sorry about that, but I think we still have a good panel. So let me give the floor to Early first. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I walk because I'm speaking better when I'm walking. So basic income experiment in Finland, basic income is in quotation marks because this, I would say, and it's good to remember that this is not a proper UBI experiment in Finland, and the reason is obvious when I go further in my presentation. So the background in the experiment that started in Finland is first of all in the fourth industrial revolution that's taking place in Finland like everywhere. And the government that launched this experiment, it was thinking that perhaps we should try something new, try to find out what are the proper responses to those challenges caused by digitalization and globalization in the Finnish labor markets. And then in Finland, we have a pretty tricky situation in that sense that we have lots of income-tested basic benefits that are paid on top of each other. So that if you have an unemployed person who is getting money from my employer, from social insurance institution, it's called basic unemployment compensation, and it's paid forever until the pension age of the person. And on top of that, the person most probably will get housing allowance and then also social assistance. And it means that those three elements are income tested, and then if a person finds an employment, in that case, everything will be taken away. And then the net effect will be something like nil, and the effective marginal tax rates in those cases are something like 80 to 100%, depending on family situation. So that it means that every single euro person is getting from employment is reduced by 80 cents or 100 cents, so that the work doesn't pay at least enough. And then there are lots of bureaucratic traps. You can imagine if person is getting 4 or 5 different benefits, and then she's running here and there and trying to somehow swim in the sea or myriads of different kind of basic benefits. Then in the very beginning I hoped that I were Tom Cruise and would do that mission impossible that the government gave to us. We had to study almost everything, so that which models are most or better or the best one to test in the Finnish context, and what are the different levels, and how to combine the existing social security system with the basic income experiment, and which kind of tax treatments there should be, etc. And then also, because this is not only a national experiment in the EU context, we had to deliberate which kind of consequences the European legislation would have in the Finnish experiment, and what will happen or would happen in the case that Finland would implement basic income, how it would be treated by the European Union. And then on the basis of those deliberations, we did some recommendations for the government on the experiment. And then as I said, that this is not only a national thing, and very much in the debates on basic income, at least in the European context, we have to take into consideration the European legislation. So that, for example, in the Dutch experiment, they are only dealing with the social assistance recipients, and they don't need to bother with and wrestle with the European legislation. But in the Finnish case, we have social assistance, housing benefits, and basic unemployment benefits that are somehow replaced by the basic income. And already when it comes to basic unemployment benefits, they to some extent are insurance-based, and all insurance-based benefits by law are regulated by the European Union. And therefore, it means that the more we replace by the basic income, the more we have to take into consideration the other European Union countries and the European legislation. So that we had 4 different options given by the parliament or the government to study full basic income. That means that the level in the Finnish case had been something like 1,000 or 1,500 euros a month. And very soon, on the basis of those micro-simulations that we were carrying out, we realized that that is totally unrealistic an approach. So that the spending levels or the spending had been something like 4 or 5 times higher than at the present system. And then a flat rate tax collected on income coming on top of basic income had been 70 or 80%, and although the Finns love their taxes, it had been too much and demanding too much love affair in that case, and I don't think that it had lasted pretty long. And then negative income taxation system was on the agenda, but at present we don't have a proper income register system in Finland. It's working on annual basis, and we should have had something that's working on monthly or probably on weekly basis. We will have it 2019, and we are very much hoping for that we can then conduct a much better experiment than this one that we are carrying out. And then especially the conservatives wanted to study the low basic income plus participation income, and participation income means that benefits are taken away if a person is not behaving properly. But we then thought that it's not the basic income, and in this experimental context we had no possibility whatsoever to screen and follow what people are doing and to decide how much they must do, which kind of things they must do, and how much they must pay for this and that. So that we thought that, okay, that's not something was. And then partial basic income was at least the option that was there. And we did, as I said, lots of micro-simulations trying to figure out what are the net effects in terms of national economy, who will win, who will lose, what are the tax levels, etc., etc. And on the basis of those simulations, we gave some recommendations to the government. The whole population had been the target of the experiment, and then it had been a randomized sampling representing the whole country and whole population, and then local experiments figuring out what the local effects and interaction effects are. And then we had an idea that we would have something like 8,000, 10,000 persons in the experiment. And we had also ideas that there had been different levels and different taxations, levels of taxation linked to those different levels, just to see how levels and how taxes affect people's behavior. But then what happened, our experiment was squeezed very much in that sense that it was 560 euros. That was the level. And in the end, we ended up taking 2,000 persons. And the reason is the government said that the limitation is 20 million, and they didn't promise anything more to us. We said that we would need 40 million extra, and they said, no way, that you have the 20 million, and then you must run with that 20 million. So that that's the obstacle and limitation, that we have only unemployed persons who are getting benefits from Kela. But I think what's good in this experiment is that it's obligatory and it's a randomized sampling out of Kela unemployed persons. And we have randomized the control group and randomized the treatment group, and then we can compare them because they are totally identical when it comes to background materials. And then the reasons why the experiment was squeezed, there were constitutional limitations, And because the Constitution is saying that everybody must be treated equally, and in this kind of experiment we are treating people unequally, then we had lots of deliberations with lawyers, is it possible to carry out. But anyway, I'm pretty satisfied that we had finally a green light to carry out this. And then Kela unemployed, it was easy to make a random sampling there, and first of all, it was easier to write a law on the experiment, because you don't understand anything about that. It's not a problem, because I do not understand anything about that, but it's just a picture which kind of things we had to deal with when we implanted a very simple thing like basic income in a very complex social security system. And this is a very simplified picture, so that when we were writing the law, it was a year ago, and happily enough in the northern hemisphere, nights are long and light, so that we had lots of time. First we had lots of inspiration, then lots of desperation, and finally lots of perspiration. But finally something came out, and what came out, it summarized it in the video that will tell everything more eloquently that I can ever do. Please, let's start the summary.
The rationale of the basic income experiment. In Finland, income security is guaranteed to everyone, while the present social security system is the result of decades of development work. Its basis was laid down in a very different world from ours. For this reason, a new social security model will be tried in Finland. A unique basic income experiment was launched in Finland in 2017. The aim of the experiment is to determine whether the social security system can be simplified and provide a stronger incentive for finding employment. At present, finding a job does not necessarily increase the income of an unemployed person, because earnings lower their social benefits. 2,000 random participants were chosen for the basic income experiment from among unemployed persons between the ages of 25 and 58. Kela has notified the participants of their selection, and individual citizens are not eligible to apply for basic income outside of this experimental group. During the experiments, the participants receive a basic monthly income of 560 euros. For example, should the unemployment benefit of the participant be higher than the basic income, the participant can apply for the exceeding amount from Kela. The basic income is a tax-free benefit and will not be reduced by any other income the participant may have. So, if the participant finds a job during the experiment, he or she will get both the salary and the basic income. The experiment will run for 2 years, and the employment situation of the participants will be monitored throughout the experiment, which will examine the question, could basic income increase employment and simplify the social security system? Kela will be responsible for implementing the experiment. For more information on the basic income experiment, go to kela.fi/basic income.
Thanks. You have no more slides? Okay.
No, nothing else to say.
Thanks very much for this wonderful presentation. Let's give the floor to Ilmar. You also have slides, right?
Yes.
So let's wait for them for a second.
Thank you. Sorry for being a bit provocative, but that's of course something that is helpful for a lively debate. I feel very sympathetic about basic income, but Of course, you have to take into account some issues that are generated by the real world that is surrounding us, and I devote some minutes on addressing these. First of all, I mean, what I will do here is I have 3 or 4 slides, and it's all about fallacies that go with the UBI. The first fallacy is about promises. If people get confronted with the idea of receiving a UBI, many people feel very happy about it, and this is a well-known phenomenon in social psychology. You always feel happy about things that you are supposed to receive. A luxury car or something like that, or a big win in a lottery, makes you much more happy during the time when you are expecting it than the moment you get it. The Mercedes-Benz, the big car, you may have thought that that will make you very happy. After 14 days, you will discover that your happiness level is not much higher than it used to be before. And that's true for many other things too. We have illusions about how happy things will make us that go away the moment we get hold of them. So I think that the positive notion that many people have when they are confronted with UBI is just an effect of this thing. And so people may have illusions about how happy it will make them, but you can feel very happy about it as long as we don't have it. The other fallacy that I would like to point to is income itself will also not increase as much as many people will think. Because all the experiments, for example, also the one that we just heard of, but also many others, are experiments where the UBI has been given to a certain group of people, and there was no need to consider where the money is coming from. But if you assume that this would be a model for everybody, the money must come from somewhere. And as a matter of fact, that will substantially lower income, because if it has to counterbalance by some source of money, then as a result, what you receive is much lower than what you expect to receive. And there are also price effects involved that I would like to address in a few seconds. So false promises is one thing, false incentives is another one. A UBI will create substantial negative incentives for effort and work. That's at least something that economists are absolutely sure about. It's called the income effect of money. And this is something that is told students in economics already in the first semester. And we have a lot of evidence that that plays a role in real life too. But there's another effect which is often underestimated in the debate. This is price effects. A lot of proponents of the UBI tell us that a UBI will make you more, let's say, selective about the jobs that you have to pick. A lot of people are forced to work in jobs that no one really wants to do. These are badly paid jobs where people have to work hard for their money. And assuming that you would have a basic income that would be sufficiently high, then of course you can become more picky about the jobs that you take. So no one maybe would be willing to clean the toilets anymore, work hard in the kitchen where it's hot and steamy and there's a lot of stress, and all those types of jobs that are low paid but still very hard to do. People might now become more picky about that, and then there are two options that may arise. First of all, no one will be wanting to do those jobs, and as a matter of fact, then we would have to do those things ourselves. That would mean, if that happens, we would be forced to do the nasty things that we used to delegate to other people ourselves, and it would take away also time from us to do those things that we are good at and where we are well paid for. So this is not at all efficient. Or what might happen instead is, if you still want to delegate these bad jobs to people, you would have to pay higher wages. That may sound like a good idea, but if you have to pay higher wages for the consumption that you are enjoying, then of course that will constrain your budget, and there will be less money left for doing all the other things that you are used to consume. So the price effect would more or less substantially melt down the real value of the UBI, and so part of the income illusion that is generated in nominal terms would not exist in real terms. A UBI is also something that would it make less attractive to invest in education. That's a serious problem for many people who are not gifted with strong intellectual skills, who may already as kids anticipate that they may end up in welfare. For them, a UBI would make it even easier to just let it go and hope for a living based on a UBI. So people would invest less in their education. And last but not least, a UBI would force states to build up huge walls, because the pull effect on immigration would be remarkable. So instead of a European unification, we would have to talk about a separation and isolation of national states, given that at least one of those would decide to go for a UBI. So false incentives is one thing. False arguments is also something that I would like to address. One of the most prominent arguments in the debate is digitization will destroy all our jobs, and we will be left with machines that are doing everything, that are producing everything for us, and there is no place for humans anymore. And so people will not be able to make the living based on their own work. This is an argument that is accompanying manhood, I guess, since its very beginning. And technical progress is not something new. It's not something that just occurred recently under the label of digitization. This is a very old phenomenon, and the fear of people about the destruction of jobs by technical progress has been accompanied manhood ever since. But in fact, technical progress has never destroyed the amount of work that people exert. And it's just the opposite. It has made our life much more easier. Work nowadays is much easier than work 200 years ago. And our lives have become much more comfortable, and we have become much more wealthier. And I don't understand why this should be different this time. There are a lot of people saying this time is different, but I've never seen a strong argument why it should be different this time. As long as I don't see that, I don't buy the argument that digitization will evaporate our work. There are many examples of UBI that are pointed to when it's advocated. There's a famous German website which is called meingrundeinkommen.de. If you take a closer look at it, it's nothing but a lousy lottery. It's a lottery that is funded by some fools who are volunteering to spend money on that. So they are collecting money by people who are willing to give money, and each time they have collected an amount of 12,000 euros, they start the lottery, and everybody can register for that lottery. You can do that, and you don't have to pay anything. I can do it as well. And once you are registered, you are part of the lottery, and you have a chance to win 12,000 euros. And for 1 year, you will be paid 1,000 euros per month. And you don't have to tax it because it's a lottery win. And lottery win is not subject to taxation in Germany. And interestingly, on the website, you can also read that a contribution or a donation to that website will not be deductible from your tax bill because it's a lottery. And it's not anything that is in, let's say, that has. Anyway, it's clearly an issue that the fiscal authorities and the provider of that lottery are clearly aware that it is a lottery and nothing else. The Finnish UBI that we just got presented by Olli it may have started out based on the idea of being a UBI, but as he already told us, it has degenerated into something which you should no longer call a UBI. It is not a UBI, even though people still call it this. And the Swiss proposal that was also mentioned here, which was also called a proposal for introduction of the UBI in Switzerland, is nothing but a, let's say, labeling trick. One of the main arguments there was a very generous proposal, by the way. If I remember correctly, it was about 2,600 euros per person that was envisaged. And the argument then was, well, that may cost a lot of money, but a lot of Swiss people earn way above 2,600 euros anyway. So why not simply, instead of taking away a substantial amount of money from them and then reissuing it to them and call it a UBI, we could just do that immediately by declaring part of your income that is subject to a work contract where you are obliged to do something in exchange for it. We just call it a UBI, and we have introduced a UBI just by a declaratory trick. But this is not a serious thing. And a lot of proposals that I'm aware of, the moment when they realize that there is a financial problem in funding the whole thing, turn into something which is known as a minimum income tax. But a minimum income tax is not a UBI. To be very clear, a minimum income tax is means tested. Sorry. Thank you very much, Philip. I'm in the negative income tax. A negative income tax is not a UBI because a negative income tax is means tested. You only benefit if you are short of money, but if you are a millionaire, you will not receive a UBI, which I don't. I'm not complaining about this, but that clearly is something different than a UBI, which is coming with the promise that everybody will have an increase of money about in a certain magnitude. So let me stop with two questions. One is, why do we have to run experiments while it would be simply sufficient to look at what people do who go on retirement or win big in a lottery? There's a lot of things that have the same impact on people's behavior like a UBI, and you can just take a look at them. I'm not aware of an overwhelming number of retirees who still continue working like they used to do before. And I know a lot of people who are looking forward to the moment when they can go on retirement. So that should make you at least critical on the idea that people will continue to work. And the argument that retirement is not comparable to something else is because people are old and they are exhausted. This simply doesn't hold. I can tell you more about that if I may. And last question is a bit rhetorical, but it's not forbidden for people who believe in the sustainability and the workability of a UBI to just join in some kind of cooperation and start practicing it among themselves. And I'm asking myself, why didn't that happen already? That casts some doubts about the trust of the proponents in the UBI that they may have themselves on the UBI. Thank you very much for your attention and hoping for a lively debate.
So we can end with we'll maybe answer those questions and reply to the arguments.
Well, I must say I used a bit of a small, a false pretext in order to be entitled to speak last. I'm a philosopher, and so philosophers in general prefer to speak last to this. Especially, I should say, as we live here about 400 meters away from the place where one of the most famous sentences in the history of philosophy was written, not unrelated to the subject today. Karl Marx lived around the corner here on the Rue de l'Alliance, and that's where he wrote the famous sentence, which stands in big letters in the foyer of Humboldt Universität and also in English translation on his grave, where he said, "Die Philosophen haben die Welt verschieden interpretiert. Es kommt darauf an, sie zu ändern." And so it's the job of the philosophers not only to interpret the world, but also to change it. And I certainly believe that's an important role. And the role of philosophers consists in saying, well, it's very important to look at problems one by one and look at what the chapter 1 of Introduction to Macroeconomics says about labor supply, and look at how KLA recipients would react and all that. But please, from time to time, lift your hand, take all this into account, and have a picture for a better world. But a better world, you must have a utopian vision about the future, and at the same time look where you put your feet so that you don't trip. And that's why I find it so important to have this sort of debate, to listen carefully to the objections. That your contribution, of Anke's contribution, had she been here are really very important contributions to the ripening of the debate. Now, what perhaps the best way in order to engage in a discussion straight away is then to come back to several of what things Hilmar said and indicate where I agree and where I don't agree. I should say that in general, also in what in Anke's earlier contributions or in the recent report, which at least the Belgians among you might have been aware of, last week a report was published by Itinera, sort of rather, I would say, a right-of-center think tank in Belgium, a sort of in-depth discussion of basic income. But in fact, most of what I need to do in response to that is do two things. Just listen to their bazooka being fired, and then boom, it just goes over my head and shoots at the target, which is really not what I'm defending. And the second thing is read our book, and there you'll find an answer to 99% of the questions you ask and the objections you make. And what do I mean specifically by that? Well, many of the attacks against basic income are based on the idea that basic income would be a big tabula rasa where you get rid of existing social insurance, where you would get rid of all elements of social assistance, which is not what is being done in the Finnish experiment, and then you replace it by an income which you pay to everyone unconditionally, rich or poor. This is not the proposal I defend, and not the proposal most people defending a basic income defend, even though some people do that. The most reasonable proposal consists in saying, look, we are going to fit under the whole distribution of income, including not only incomes from labor and incomes from capital, but also some benefits that will remain conditional under the present conditions, will fit under all of that an unconditional floor, and socle, a socle. And of course, the higher the socle, the more of an impact it will have, but you'll keep supplement top-ups that are related to the present conditions, that are submitted to the present conditions. That's the sort of perspective we must have. And for example, in the Swiss debate, where what was being proposed was 2,500 Swiss francs per capita, so 2,300 euros more or less at the time, unconditionally to each adult citizens, 25% of that for each child. Well, I took part in the Swiss debate on various occasions, in big debates in Zurich and in Geneva. But I told the supporters of the Swiss proposal, look, of course, if I'd been a Swiss citizen, I would have voted yes to the referendum. But had I been a member of the Conseil Fédéral, their executive, and in charge of implementing the 2,500 euros the following day, I would resign immediately. Because, and then they replied, and that's important to bear in mind, they replied, yes, but you are a naive foreigner. You don't know what it costs to live if you live alone in Zurich, right? And if you want to live poverty, to get rid of poverty, that's the level you need to have. Yes, but basic income will not suppress income poverty on its own, because given that it's strictly individual and it's universal, the implied cost would be very high. And the costing proposals that were made, I don't agree with you that it was in the end a variant of EITC, it was really a basic income they were proposing. But I agree with you that the cost proposals that were made were totally naive and sort of purely static in a way that indeed would, even the first chapter of Microeconomics 1 would convince anyone that this is not the sort of way you need to reason about that. But the point is that what you need to, and nevertheless, also in terms of poverty, a much lower level of basic income would make a difference. Basic income being defined by 3 unconditionalities, strictly individual, then there is no means test, so rich and poor, and there is no work test, so it's given also irrespective of whether you are able to work and willing to work. Well, even at a low level, say 500 euros, 600 euros, even somewhat less, depending on the GDP per capita in the various countries, it would make a difference also for poverty. It's not sufficient to get rid of poverty, but first of all, the rate of take-up of all our conditional social assistance schemes, Hartz IV, Arbeitslosengeldfrei, or revenu de solidarité, RSA, revenu de solidarité active, or leefloon, whatever we have, all these things have a rate of take-up that is far lower than 100%. The poor who are entitled to it, many of them don't get it because of a lack of information, for which procedures are often complex and I get lost in it and I have all sorts of problems, and because of the stigmatization involved in it. So in terms, and so there is a safety net now, but there are holes, and some of the least advantaged in our society fall through these holes. 1, 2, there is the so-called poverty trap. The fact you can, in the current system, and Oli referred to it, in many of the, nearly all the current systems, well, if you have a benefit and then you start working, people say, bravo, as a reward, we take your benefit away. In the case of, if you have a firm basis on which you can stand, well, this helps reduce, at the limit abolish, for some categories of recipients, abolish the poverty trap related to this. And the third aspect is that often ignored in all the statistics about income inequality or poverty, it ignores the intra-household poverty. It does make a difference to give to every member of a household a separate, autonomous, separate income of her own. And so we quote a famous passage from Virginia Woolf about the importance of having not only a room of one's own, but an income of one's own. And of course, for women in particular, this is of great importance. So that's, in order to frame the debate properly, it's important not to use a straw man or or a caricature of what is being proposed, namely something like 1,000, 1,500 euros per capita, 2,500 Swiss francs, and then you get rid of all the rest. No, meaningful proposals say, well, we need to move in a prudent way by adopting a level of basic income that will not allow us to scrap all the other systems. It will need to be complemented, and the point is not to replace social assistance and social insurance, because it will need to be recalibrated if basic income is in place, but it will enable these other schemes, the two components of our current welfare state, to do a better job than they do now, to do better the job for which they have been designed. Now I'll go quickly through a number of points you raised, sometimes in order just to clarify the issues. First, I'll mention 4 points with which I agree. One, very briefly in each case. One, what you said about happiness. I couldn't agree more. We have a section in our ethical chapter, chapter 5 in our book, where we say, please don't argue for basic income as a contribution to happiness. You simply don't know anything about it, and all the arguments that are being used for that purpose are flimsy, if only because of the Easterlin paradox and a number of things that have been now abundantly investigated. But above all, the aim must not be to have a happy society. This is absurd as an aim for our societies. Why? And I quickly give that the intuition of it, which in a way is contained in a neat paradox that was presented by Durkheim, founding father of sociology, where he said that, in fact, he noted that there was a bizarre positive correlation between how civilized the society was in terms of income, but also in terms of rights, equality, men and women, and positive correlation between that, civilization so defined, and the rate of suicide, what he called sad suicides, not the suicides which you do as a kamikaze or something to save your country, but really because you think that life is not worth living. It was particularly high in Finland, by the way.
I think that it's as high here nowadays.
It's come down in Finland, perhaps because Finland is less civilized now than it used to be. But anyway, so the point is that whatever the details also of his analysis, and he said, well, what should we conclude? Should we try to make our societies less civilized, including in terms of equality of rights? No. It's we need to make our societies more just. That's the point. And of course, you're in the process. Well, more happiness for a number of people may be a good byproduct, but you shouldn't be guided by that. If our society, by making it less just, by convincing people that they should remain poor, if you make the society more happy, it wouldn't be a better society. No, but I agree with this certainly on this point. Secondly. Yes, about the negative effects on effort and work. So there are various, some experiments certainly can teach us something, but even though often it's not what we want to know. But one of the sort of really uncontroversial outcomes of the negative income tax experiments in the 1970s in the US was that there was some fall in the labor supply of secondary earners, that is mainly mothers. I once discussed this with Jim Tobin, the American economist, and who had been one of the inspirers of the thing, and he said, well, yes, there have been two main results of these experiments. Neither of them surprised me. One is the one I just mentioned. The other one was, in one of the experiments, the increase in the rate of divorce. But he said, what disappointed me was the political reaction to this, because this was part of the purpose. Because what it reflects is that these women got more bargaining power and more autonomy, and as a result of which they could avoid the double shift where they get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, have to park their kids, take the bus, go and clean houses, etc., and then come back in the evening. Some of them could reduce their working time thanks to this further autonomy. What's wrong with that, he said. What's wrong with that? And two, some of them were only with their mates because they had no other opportunity. They get a bit of autonomy. At least those who were most fed up with their guys could go away and sack them. And he said, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? So that some of these things, which are too easily perceived by economists saying, oh, a fall in the labor supply, this is really a negative thing. It's wonderful in some cases, not in all cases. And of course, you need to think about the sustainability of the whole system and so on. But having some fall in the labor supply, especially when this fall in the labor supply, this predicted fall, doesn't take into account the response of the other side of the labor market, to which you also alluded. Because if there are all these women who stopped doing the sometimes shitty job or badly organized jobs they used to do, and they stopped doing it, well, you want their work. What are you going to do? You are going to pay them better. And that's not bad to have women paid a bit better compared to men than today. And two, you'll try to improve their working conditions so that less of them will drop out because they'll be able to fit their working times better with this thing. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? So that's a point on which, as you have perceived, I agree on some of the aspects you said, but not on the conclusions you draw from it. Of course, what does need, and you're absolutely right, that we need to think about this in general equilibrium terms. And that, and so it's not true. Some people are sometimes worried about the price effect and the inflationary effect. You say, well, you give money to everyone and so prices will increase. No, this is too simplistic. And of course, in the case of quantitative easing for the people, there you want some inflation. It's part of the purpose, and you use money creation for that purpose. But in most cases, you fund it through redistribution. And whatever net cost there is, you adjust in terms of rates of taxation, so there is no increase in aggregate effective demand. But there is, of course, a price effect that will come via the labor market. If some goods will be produced, some services will be produced more expensively because of some people withdrawing from the labor market or reducing their participation in the labor market. But on that aspect, so I really, and that's crucial again to understand what a basic income is and what it's aimed for. Basic income should give people a greater ability, a greater possibility to say no to certain jobs, but also to say yes to certain jobs. And to say no to certain jobs, including cleaning our toilets. I sometimes say, in order to provoke my colleagues, academics, that one day when the basic income will be high enough, well, the people cleaning our toilets will be better paid than us. And what would be wrong with that? What would be wrong with that? Some of them don't like it. Maybe you don't like it. But I think that would only be fair, because the people who have, because of all the other things they can do, who have other options, of course, they have bargaining power, and they can, and that leads to the positive correlation, which is absurd, between the rate at which, and contrary to what Adam Smith was wishing and predicting, and you have a positive correlation between how well people are paid and how high the quality of their job is. You should have the opposite. And of course, the higher the basic income, the more bargaining power you give to the people with least of that bargaining power. Of course, with a modest basic income, the impact will be modest, but it will be in that direction. Let me then just perhaps pick up one final thing on which I agree, and then one on which I disagree. Digitalization. Again, I couldn't agree more about this idea of an absolute rarefaction of jobs, and that makes you need, and the Mark Zuckerberg argument now, and so there is robotisation, artificial intelligence, and all the rest. There won't be enough jobs for everyone, but big businesses, including the robot owners, want people to have some money. They don't want them to starve, but all they want them to buy their products, right? It's no one, the robots won't buy the products, so we need to give them money. I don't believe in that argument. I was at Stanford University in Palo Alto a couple of months ago for the book launch of this book, and there that argument is very popular. And I started off by saying that I had just received issue number 1183 of a French magazine called La Grande Relève, short for La Grande Relève des Hommes par la Machine. It's a magazine that was founded in 1935 by a certain Jacques Dubois, who had published a book under that title. And so since 183 months ago, they are expecting the Grande Relève, the great replacement of man by the machine, and that the crisis of underconsumption would arise as a result of that. That hasn't happened for reasons to which you rightly pointed. That doesn't mean that technological change is not relevant, and that why? Because in combination, sort of technological change we have in combination with globalization leads to a polarization of earning power that is worrying, and that is part of what is driving the popularity of basic income now. That means that the people who have the sort of skills that are very useful with these technologies and that are valued worldwide, these people see their earning power explode in the form of ownership of intellectual property rights or in the form of high wages. But the people who are at the bottom, who at least currently, as they are, don't have these sort of skills, or may be condemned to, or are constrained in all sorts of ways also by their family responsibilities, and for that reason a very low earning power, these people, the loser of globalization, the precariat, the people who are fragilized, these people are at risk of being, of really sort of getting stuck into a situation of poverty. And so you can have all sort of sparadrap, all sort of little things that may help solve those problems, but the best structural solution, and I view you can only have variants of that solution as a structural solution, consists in putting this floor under everyone. Final point, the borders. So this was indeed, you'll have this, all these people flocking in from around the world in order to come and benefit from your basic income. When I first presented that idea and got a prize for a scenario, a basic income scenario I had written, that was in 1984, when I had to coin the expression allocation universelle, because no one had ever talked about that idea in French. We were, it was that's my last word, the employment minister at the time, Michel Ancen, later Secretary General of the ILO, who gave the prize, and he said, come and talk about it in our cabinet, which we did. And then I mentioned that problem. I said, well, isn't there a problem with the basic income? And that is that you'll have selective or opportunistic immigration to come in. And his chief of cabinet said, well, look, there is nothing specific about basic income in this respect. It's the same for any non-contributive transfer system. So our current guaranteed minimum income system, and that is conditional in various ways, not individual. It's you need to be willing to work, and it's not given to the rich. Well, that one is equally vulnerable to opportunistic migration. So, because people, it's not the fact that it's individual, it's not the fact that it's given to the rich, that's the problem. It's not even the fact that there is a willingness to work. These people who would come in are willing to work. But it's the fact that there is a net transfer, tax-funded net transfer, and that wouldn't be funded through a social insurance system. It's not restricted to the people who have contributed. And so the way we would need to handle that will never be very clean, as it's not very clean in the case of Hartz IV or RSA or whatever, which is that before settling, you can't just move in and then enjoy the full non-contributory benefit from the start. And that's what is done now and what would be needed in the case of a basic income. But my basic comment is that it's essential to have this sort of discussion, even the misunderstandings, even the very, like the itinerary report. In fact, the two authors invited me for lunch yesterday to ask me to forgive them for not having read the book before writing a number of silly things in their piece. But I think this really is very important for the contribution to the debate. And however naive the arguments for the Swiss proposal, and so on the part of the initiators, nice guys, but they wanted a Kulturimpulse. They were not interested in economics. And or what Benoît Hamon did in France, this was a tremendous contribution to opening the debate beyond academics, as is the Finnish experiment. It's fantastic. So as soon as the very news of the prospect of an experiment came to Belgium, RTL phoned me and they said, we need to interview you urgently. Can we come to your house? They came to interview me. And then I said, come on, relax. It's they're not going. And then I watched television in the evening, and you saw Father Christmas on a sort of snow things being pulled, being pulled, and bringing to the Finnish population some basic income. There was, and it still ended with, I repeat, and Finland is going soon to introduce a basic income. So, but all this makes people think about the idea, the pros and cons, and then at a high level, this sort of meeting is really what we need.
Okay, thanks for those enlightening presentation and speeches. Maybe before I give the floor to the audience, maybe Oli or Ilmar, you want to react to what each other said? Yeah, let's start with you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excellent presentations. I feel a little bit uncomfortable here. I'm not in between you, but mentally I'm in between you. So that I'm not a believer of what you seem to be. You are in favor of basic income and you are opposing basic income. I'm just a simple-minded empiricist, and I want to have my experiments. You criticized those experiments, but I think that the experiment we are doing is not an optimal one. But anyway, I think that the results that we will get, they are better than nothing. And very often those strong arguments that we are presenting, either in favor or against basic income, are based on nothing, so that the empirical basis is pretty weak. And I must say that in my group I had a good economist and bad economist. I don't say which one was which. And the other one was saying that this is bullshit altogether, what we are doing. And the other said that now we will solve all those happiness problems and solve the suicide rates in Finland and whatever will happen, so that we will have heaven in earth. So that I was trying to balance with those issues, and I'm somehow, as I said, that I'm satisfied with the experiment despite the problems. And what you, Ilmar, said about the experiments, that actually we are planning to do that kind of lottery things, as you said. And also we are going to look at the widows' pensions, because they are kind of natural experiment. That usually he's dying away, either through his own hands or through natural causes. And she's there suddenly with a huge sum of money in the best case. And then we can somehow look what she will do. So that's one thing what we are planning to do, and expand those experiments. And then digitalization, you agreed, and I do agree that digitalization will not take away all jobs. But at least in my country, it's happening so that the characteristics of jobs are changing, so that nothing has happened that much. If you look at the employees, 80% of the Finnish males have permanent full-time jobs, 70% of females. And nothing has happened since the 60s in that relation. But if you look at self-employment, it has increased hugely. And I don't know how is it in your countries, but in my country, social security for proper employees is pretty good. But in the case that you are self-employed and in the case that you are freelancer or micro-entrepreneur, in that case you will fall through. And that's one thing what the government wants to know, if it's possible to make safety net more tight. And then I think, coming back to those experiments, I think that each country is a little bit specific case. So that, for example, in the Canadian experiment, they are referring to child poverty, whereas in the Finnish case, we said nothing, or the politicians said nothing about that issue, so that it's absent in the Finnish case, whereas the work incentives and disincentives are there very prominently, but not in the Canadian case. And then finally, it may be so that the basic income would decrease investment in education, but those experiments that we had, or that they had in the States in the 70s, 80s, and in Canada, they showed that the children in those families that participated in the experiment, they continued longer in education and had a better educational attainments than those who were not involved. So that, I don't know, perhaps long-term effects are different as those effects that were prominent when the experiments were running. And then the final thing, to support the basic income, it's pretty easy to get cheap support. In that case, that for example, we asked in the Finnish population, is basic income a good thing? 70% of the Finns said that, of course, it's a good thing. And then we said that if basic income would be 560 euros, then we have to collect flat rate tax on income coming on top of basic income at the rate of 42%. Is it a good thing or bad? 40% of the Finns said that it's a good thing. So that, and I think that the Swiss experiment, it was not properly calculated and it was not anchored in political debates at all, so that there were lots of enthusiastic people that had both of their feet firmly in the air, and then they came out with a totally utopian high level of basic income. So that in some, very often people ask me that what I think about basic income, and my answer has always now been, I don't know yet.
And when will you know? Just when will you get some result for your experiment?
We will come back to that issue in the latter part of 2019.
Okay. Okay, we'll reinvite you into the meeting.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm looking forward to that.
Okay. Ilmar, maybe you want to react before we give the floor to the audience?
I think I shall say that I'm fully sharing the intentions behind when suggesting a UBI. And this is about fighting inequality. It's about human dignity. And from that point of view, I found one issue very interesting about what you were saying. You were mentioning that we have a lot of instruments that are meant to protect people from falling into poverty, which are simply not taken up because people are not aware of the possibilities, or the amount they are eligible for is too low, so it doesn't pay off for them, or the cost of information is too high. And the UBI at a low level would simply be a contribution to overcome this kind of unfairness. And this is an interesting point. I've never thought about it like this, but I think that's worth giving it a try. But that would, all reservations that I made against a UBI are reservations that are valid as soon as we are talking about a substantial level of UBI. But what would be necessary in order to overcome that type of unfairness would be way lower. And I mean, a very low UBI, of course, doesn't have the same impact as a UBI which is at the level of the average income of a society. So we cannot just ignore levels here. And from that point of view, I think that I accept that, at least that point. What I don't accept, or sorry, I should not say that. Where I disagree is the immigration pull thing, because I think there's a crucial difference between the practice of welfare and a UBI, because when immigrants come, they are lowly educated, especially if they come for humanity reasons. And so they have difficulties in integrating into a society that is requiring a high level of skills and qualifications. But we don't leave them just as they are. We challenge them by providing language skills, by providing occupational skills, and people who do not want to comply with that request can become subject to a complete cut of their welfare claims. And that's a crucial difference with regard to UBI, because a UBI is a UBI, and you have no possibility to cut it down for a certain group of people. And I think that makes a huge difference. If it is allowed for people to come to a place where a UBI is implemented, simply attracted by the promise that they can receive money and they can even send remittances back to their relatives in their home countries, and there's nothing that they have to do for it in exchange. I think that is a difference to social policy that is based on some kind of mutual expectations and that takes mutual expectations serious. From that point of view, I have to disagree with what you're saying. It's not the same with UBI and welfare. That may be true for, I think you referred to it as a thing that happened in the 1980s. And especially in Germany, I can tell you it's true for the 1980s that receiving welfare was basically not a big issue, and people were not challenged. But that has substantially changed, not only in Germany, it has changed in many countries, and I think there are reasons for it that we have to take into account. My reservations against the experiments is not coming against your experiment in particular, by the way. Don't feel offended by that. My reservation is coming from the fact that the pure fact that experiments are run is abused in the public debate, because the typical argument goes like, they are now doing it in Finland, and we have done it in Namibia, and it's coming soon everywhere. This is the rhetorics behind using experiments as an indication for it must be good. If the Finns are doing it, they can't be fools. The government has decided to promote it, so then our government is foolish that they don't follow the Finns. This is the kind of rhetorics. People who argue like this don't understand only a slight bit of what is really going on in Finland. And also the same thing is true with meingrundeinkommen.de. It's used as an example that it works, and it's already implemented here and there. So why don't we do it? And this is where my reservation is coming from. It's simply an abuse of things that are there, are existing here and there, and it's used as a shortcut to let's say, prevent people from having to think about it. And this is the problem I see, but has nothing to do with what you are doing. I mean, I'm curious to see what's coming out of that, but and I'm pretty sure you're doing it in a state-of-the-art manner, so that at the end we will really be able to draw serious conclusions from it.
Yeah, I hope that. Yeah. Let's see, and that's why I'm saying that let's wait for the results before we are saying anything, so that I fully agree that those experiments are used as an excuse for
exactly.
kind of lousy thinking, because
exactly.
experiments they don't mean that something will be implemented, not in Finland, so that I doubt that it will not be implemented in Finland. But I have a small question to Philip. What we have been thinking when we were...
Because we have only 15 minutes.
Yeah, when we were planning the experiment, what on earth should we do with those youngsters who are not in employment, not in education, not in training, so that if we are paying basic income to them, will they immediately go and be included in education and find employment, etc. So that what should we do?
Maybe before you answer that, let's take
Yeah.
other questions. Other set of questions, you can answer also questions at the same time. Yeah, we have some questions from the back. There is a mic somewhere that you can use. Okay, there.
Is it functional? Okay. Good morning, citizens. My name is Angelos Harlaftis, Eco Waves Movement, a movement, pan-European and Mediterranean movement, which is based in direct democracy, in science and in ecology. We have written in the ecumenic theory the approach of our friend of wisdom, of Sophia. We don't know what is exactly meaning the universal. We are mainly interested in Europe and Mediterranean. And as we have seen in Australia, where the security system is implementing from 90s the basic kind of basic income, I don't know if you can call it a basic income, but the citizen who doesn't want to work or who has inabilities to work, he gets a basic a monthly income in order to pay his rent and to have bread and food in his table. If he doesn't want to work all his life, it remains this income to his or his life. The experiment on Finland is very good. The latest psychological results we have, they are showing that not the happiness, because happy in Greek means pill, and the Huxley's society is based in happiness. So the Finland's experiments are very important because it puts out the current security system, which is not stabilized. It doesn't have a future, as we all know, and we keep it by the debts economies, by making money from electronic form without any kind of hardware of materialistic basement. So the basic income for Europeans, at least, and Mediterraneans, it's very important. And about your questions, I thank you for the gentleman on the right from my hand for his questions, because your questions are very logical for the simple people, for the simple citizen. But you have to take into consideration that in the future we'll have the robots, because Marx didn't think about the humanized machines. He spoke for machines which during the time they didn't have a humanized form like the robots are. So the robots are going to do all this kind of job. Already we have a lot of robots. We have around 10 million robots all around the earth now. So the cost of the current system, it obliges us to make this income to the citizens in the future society, because your way of thinking is today's way of thinking. And the way of the basic income, written on from 80-40 from your side, still cannot be implemented. We need more improvement to the technological point of view to come to this basic income, which will give a lot of solutions to the current insurance system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Yeah, in the first row. Quick questions, please.
Yes, please. Thank you for the enlightening presentations. I have a question about the concept of universality, because I'm not sure if this is the basic income is applicable to, for example, the scale of the universally applicability, because is it applicable only to a town or a nation state, or on a cosmopolitan scale that based on a human rights principle that every human being deserves the basic income? And a second question is that is it economically sound to provide the basic income? Because from the point of view of the experiment, I see that the experiment is from a chosen group of people from the society, and one must be blind not to miss the benefits of this group of the people compared to the rest of the society. But does it really feasible to generalize to the whole society that everybody gets more extra income? If everybody gets the income, the money, credit, then it means that nobody has received better income, and it certainly generates like the deflation of the money value, and maybe one day you can buy a bread with this some of the income, and the other day you can only buy half of this. Is it? So I want to address to Professor Barry is what's the difference between the universal basic income compared to Rawls, like the basic access to like resources, other resources like education and like basic system. Thank you.
Yeah, let's take another one, and then we give. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
If you can be quick,
Yes,
because,
yes.
Yeah.
I will be very quick. So my question is to summarize all the discussion. So what is the key purpose of the universal basic income? Like the key purpose. And if it's reducing poverty, can't we use the frameworks that we already have in our countries already? Like, do we need to implement this universal basic income, or maybe can't we already use the social benefits or other frameworks that we already have in place? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and there is a last one there, and then we stop. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
one of the
exactly.
key problems of the unemployment rate in France is the high cost of production that businesses face. Do you believe that the UBI could counter the high cost of production, or do you believe that there is just no correlation between the high cost of production and the UBI? The high cost of productions that businesses face and the UBI. Do you believe that there is a correlation between that, and do you believe that the UBI could counter these problems? Yeah.
That the high cost of production could be countered by the creation of UBI. That's what you mean?
Yeah, so do you believe that the UBI could counter the high costs of production that businesses face in France? Or do you believe that there is just no correlation?
Let's give back the floor to our speakers. You have noted well all the questions, I hope. Who wants to start? Maybe Philippe, given that you didn't have the time the occasion to speak twice.
Yeah. Right. But I didn't quite understand every question, so I didn't quite see what the question was well, there were many things in the first intervention, and of course, I mean, the reference to Australia, of course, many countries have introduced some sort of guaranteed minimum income scheme that is conditional in various ways. It's targeted at, in our case, targeted at the poor, but the extent to which they implemented the work test and the availability for work varied considerably from one country to another. What is being a job seeker in the United Kingdom is not quite the same as being a benefit recipient in some other countries. In Germany, it changed before Hartz IV and after Hartz IV. And there are even variations from one commune, from one municipality to another in a country like Belgium. But the principle is always that there has to be some sort of reciprocity. Perhaps then I'll take the the question, the relationship with human rights, and also, which is partly the question of the scale at which it needs to be introduced. Of course, the most realistic scale at which we must be thinking about this sort of reform is the national scale currently, because most of the social policy is at that level. I don't think it makes any sense to introduce it at a lower level because of the mobility, which of course at a lower level, at the level of land or at the level of Schleswig-Holstein or whatever, which is considering an experiment, and so it doesn't make sense. Or in Brussels only, it wouldn't make sense. At a higher level, it would make economic sense, but of course it's more difficult to get it to make it politically feasible. I'm myself an advocate of something called a euro dividend, low basic income, 200 euros, funded by VAT for a number of reasons, including many that haven't been mentioned here, but that are specific to what needs to be achieved at the level of the European Union, including the economic sustainability of the euro and the political feasibility of the Schengen Agreement, not unrelated to the migration issue, which you rightfully raised. And so that's one thing, and the question of the scale must remain essentially the level of the nation state. But the other question, the other aspect of that question is whether it's a human right. I don't, and sometimes you have also these enthusiastic defenses of a basic income as a human right. I don't believe that. I think there is something like in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is something like an unconditional right to a minimum income, but we shouldn't confuse an unconditional right to an income with a right to an unconditional income. And that is the unconditional right to an income can remain an income that is not strictly individual. It's given at the level of the household. The design is such that it's targeted at the poor, and you can require the people who are able to work in order to get that income. And so you can't derive a justification for an unconditional basic income from the Declaration of Human Rights. On the other issue you mentioned, which is the inflationary aspect, I briefly alluded to that before. Of course, if you can't say that with a basic income, everyone's income will go up. This is absurd. Even if you funded it with money creation, the nominal income of everyone would go up, but it would create inflation, and the real income would be affected by it through a mechanism distinct from the one you mentioned, but essentially it comes down to the same. I'll just finish by reacting in two ways to what has been said, which is that I fully understand your irritation about all the things that are being said. Look at Namibia, look at what happened. And for a number of reasons. I mean, Namibia, for example, it was a real basic income in a small village at the level of 4% of GDP per capita in Namibia. And in a context in which for the people before retirement age, in which they had nothing. So how can you derive anything from an experiment like that to what would happen in our context, where in fact where we have already a guaranteed minimum income of some sort? Even related to what you said, Oli, even for example what we can say about the impact on human capital by saying look at Dauphin or look at this thing. We need to do that in an extremely careful way, because for many of these families, a number of these families, they had nothing before. And you have to see what was the background situation in which it was introduced, what exactly was the scheme. It was a negative income scheme that resembles in such a way. So even when we have carefully made experiments, not like the Namibian one, and then we need to compare what was exactly introduced and what was the background in which it was introduced before deriving any conclusion. So I agree with that. In fact, a part of our book, the motivation of our book was really to get these things straight and to sort of tell people, stop using these sort of stupid arguments, and we try to explain why and to say how much can be said on that basis and how little, and also what promises can be made with the current experiments, and what limits are intrinsic to any experiments, in particular the fact that you can never put in the experiments the people who will be net contributors. You can't tell people, look, for for 2 years or 5 years, you are going to earn less than other people in your situation, and we'll just see how you react. We find it interesting. And then who will want to join that sort of experiment? Finally, then on immigration, that's also a point made by Anke in our thing. So with non-conditional basic income, you have these 3 unconditionalities which define it. But I'm personally not against a number of other conditions that are sometimes added, like, for example, saying you can only get a child benefit from your basic income for your children if you do some healthcare tests when they are very young, or if you send them to school. And similarly, I would say, if for people who are recent immigrants don't master the language of the place where they move into, I'm not against imposing, saying, well, you only get it if you go through these language courses which are provided to you. And there may be some additional conditions of this sort. So that I'm not, and some sort of participation income in some conditions as is proposed by, so I'm not a purist in this, and in any case we need to move forward in a prudent way, in a cautious way, and we won't just jump stages.
One word maybe from Ilmar and from Oli before we close the session, because we already run out of time.
Yeah, I would like to reply to the first intervention also. If I understood correctly, you were objecting my positive view on technological progress, and you were saying robots will destroy all our jobs. I don't share that view, but and what I see in sorry, did I get you wrong? Sorry, then. Okay. Then I would like to address, we can save time here, would like to address the last point, that if, I don't know whether I got it right, but the idea was, could a UBI counteract high cost of production? And I understood it like firms would be allowed to pay lower wages because workers would have a certain minimum income anyway. That's an interesting view, but I would not like to advocate this, because we call it a subsidy, and we know a lot about the unintended side effects of subsidies that can put you in all kinds of trouble that you were not able to anticipate. And I'm strongly advocating to let market mechanisms to decide over the right prices. I don't think it's a good idea to justify a UBI based on, let's say, increasing our competitiveness. Competitiveness should be improved by quality of service and quality of products, but not by a UBI.
You spoke first, you will speak last.
Yeah, so Philip started with his presentation a quotation from Karl Marx, and I'll end in the same tone. Because when planning this experiment, I have very much been amused by an old Soviet joke. Polytruk went to a factory placing socialism and communism in front of 4,000 persons. And then after 4 hours lecture, he asked that you have something to ask. Nobody dared to ask. Then finally, Ivan rose his hand and asked that, dear comrade Polytruk, who invented socialism? Was it scientists or proletariat? And then Polytruk thought that, of course, it was scientists. Marx was the greatest scientist, then Lenin followed him, and the greatest scientist is Father Sonny Stalin, of course. But then he thought that if I say that scientists invented socialism, in that case they will be pissed off with me and the whole idea of communism. And he said that, of course, it was proletariat that invented communism. And then the Ivan guy said that, Yeah, that was what I thought. In the case that it had been scientists, in that case they had first experimented with rabbits.
Okay, thanks for this conclusion. Join me in thanking our three speakers for their great speeches and presentations.